Maxfield will dial in. All right, so we'll call the meeting to order at 6:04. Um, and agendas. Roger, you sent out an agenda. I talked to Hayden earlier with the thought that we might have to modify it a little bit, but Hayden, I see you you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, so to speak. Maybe that's a good thing. Our first item on the agenda is amendments to the agenda. Does anybody have things they want to add or adjust? I think, I have some things I want to talk about, but they really fit under the forest management plan, so. Hearing no amendments, then the next item is to approve minutes from the last meeting. Anybody care to make a motion?
I'll move to approve minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? Notice a couple spelling errors, my pet peeve.
Sorry.
But, okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting? Opposed? Minutes are approved unanimously. Next item is public comment. And, I see Linda's iPhone as our select board chair and member of the public, but Linda, anything you want to say or any other public comment? All right, then we can move on to status report from TPL.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see such a large group of folks meeting in person tonight. Yeah, so from last month, we're moving forward with the environmental issues. Stone Environmental had engineers on Rhoda's property last week and took soil samples of both the affordable house site and the community forest pole site. Those samples have been sent to the lab, and now we're just waiting for the results, which we expect will be provided probably at some point. Just putting on my calendar. Not next week, probably the week after. So the week of the 20th is our assumption there. It takes a little while for them to process those. In the meantime, we're trying to figure out what our potential funding paths are for the remediation. This Stone Environmental has submitted a proposal for funding to help cover some of these pre-remediation costs with documentation and things like that for the Lamoille County Brownfields Committee to review at their upcoming meeting, which I believe is next week. And then if recommended by the Brownfields Committee, it will be moved forward toward the Lamoille County Planning Commission's board later this month. Those costs would cover things like the Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity's BRELA application, which is the liability coverage through the state of Vermont, as well as some of, like I said, pre-documentation stuff around planning of how the remediation would take place on both sites.
Hayden, sorry to interrupt. I'm fear I'm losing track a little bit. I think we're into so you're talking about getting funding to do all of these sort of permit application. These things are permit application things, and we're looking for funding to get Stone to help with that.
So Stone, so the funding that is going to the Lamoille County Planning Commission is covering Stone's work to plan, and they have to essentially write reports documenting how they plan on doing the remediation. The cost to prepare and develop these reports is what we're proposing for the Lamoille County Planning Commission. So that's all part of kind of like before actual cleanup happens, they need to do documentation showing the state that they're following the right necessary processes to make sure it's done in the right way to be able to get a certificate when it's done, saying that the site's been fully cleaned to the state's satisfaction. So that's what we're trying to do right now is get the funding to make sure that the reports are covered financially. And Stone's been essentially leading the way on that.
Gotcha. So, and in the big picture, the overall timeline, tell me if I'm right. The plans need to be in place for us to be able to go ahead with close it. But the remediation could happen after closing if we have the plans in place. Is that correct?
That's pretty much right. Yeah. So once the plans are ready to go, they've been approved, and we have funding in place. More importantly, that limits our risk, knowing that both the funding to do the planning work, but then also the funding in place for the remediation costs. That's a separate pot of money that comes from a
Gotcha.
separate source. We want to make sure that both the town and Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity, as future landowners, have funding secured for remediation to take place under their ownership.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm struck by number one, how responsible, just the level of responsibility to take care of all of these parts and pieces. And gratitude for TPL and Stone for doing this. And of course, number two, the main thing I'm interested in is what's the date for the closing, right? But when can we, how does this affect our critical path to getting to closing?
I think we'll likely have a very clear sense of what the closing will be once we get these lab results back. It's hard to predict without knowing kind of the, I don't want to say severity because that sounds a bit overboard, but I want to know exactly kind of the size and the scale of what this cleanup is going to have to take place before knowing what funding pots we need, what documentation needs to happen, if the funding, if the remediation that takes place is significant for the community forest process, for the community forest site, we could be looking at a completely different timeline than if the size of the cleanup is actually rather small and the cleanup is small, the costs are less significant, and we can actually expedite it in a faster way. So there's kind of two different potential paths forward, and they all kind of hinge on the way these samples come back in a couple weeks.
Wow, cool. Lots of uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah, that's the way we like to do things here. So yeah, so that's any other questions on the environmental stuff?
I mean, they're all questions. The question is all about, how to close it. So, any other questions on environmental?
I don't have a question, but I have a point information. The Northern Rivers Land Trust was notified last week that a grant that we submitted to the Nature Conservancy to provide more funding to this project has been approved. We asked for $50,000. We have not been told yet how much we're going to get, but we have been told that it has been approved.
Yeah.
All of the work was done by Hayden and Kate to put that proposal together. It was submitted under NRLP's letterhead, but another success.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah, so as soon as I know the amount, I'll let you know and pass it on.
Okay, and would that, so that pool of money, would that, does that have, is it earmarked for specific uses?
Hayden, can you answer? You can probably answer that better than I can.
Yeah, some of that money is going to cover some of the costs that we've already accounted for, some of the due diligence costs that we've already TPL's kind of paid for out of pocket in part of this process. It's also going to cover some of the other kind of staff time and the resources because this has taken months longer than what we had originally planned for. So yeah, we've budgeted for it in different ways, but there is some flexibility to it.
Okay, so this is kind of a windfall, but counterbalances all the extra work.
Yeah, this is a huge help, especially with the fact that this has taken months longer, like I had just said. This
Yeah.
is a huge boost to help cover some of these additional costs we've been taking on as we sort out these environmental issues.
So here's my, $64,000 question, I suppose. The big question. How are we tracking in terms of, in terms of budget to actuals or projected at completion? Are we coming up short, or are we doing okay?
I think we're doing okay. We secured some community forest funding, Trust for Public Land did, that covers kind of like 2 different calendar years for Vermont, like our Vermont community forest work. Um, and this is our only active community forest project right now. So a lot of that funding is getting kind of drawn into this. It wasn't originally meant to specifically serve Wolcott specifically, but this is our only active project, and this is the one that we're dedicating the funding towards for the most part. So we're looking pretty good. We're trying to make sure that I'll get to sinuosity in a moment in terms of trails and permitting, but we are looking. This is just off the top of my head, but I think we have a $1.8 million kind of budget right now. And with additional staff time and costs, it's probably going to be over a $2 million total budget at the end by closing. But our philanthropy team has done an incredible job. NRLT and their support to be able to get additional funds has been fantastic. So I think we're overall in a pretty safe place. We actually just submitted another small grant, I think for like $5,000 to a local bank to help raise some additional. We're actively fundraising still for this one. So we haven't kind of closed up that door yet.
So that might be a topic to come back to on the, but sounds good for now. Just looking around the room, if anybody has ideas about fundraising activities, keep them percolating.
And in the budget, I should point out that we still are intending to set aside the town management endowment. So that's still a budget line item that we're including in terms of closing, making sure that the town has a management endowment at closing, as well as ensuring that NRLT has their full, the original stewardship endowment that we offered. I think it was around $25,000. That's been fulfilled too. That was some additional money came in from the TNC grant that I think met our $25,000 goal there for that. So that's also another budget line item that's guaranteed at closing.
Very cool.
In terms of trails, I've been communicating with Mariah a lot over the past couple weeks. She's been doing a ton of work to get the permitting done for the trails, and it's been a bigger lift than I think she expected going into this. So she's been working with multiple state employees in different departments to make sure that we're meeting our permitting. We haven't actually, from my understanding, we haven't actually triggered any permits as of this time. But I think her main objective is ensuring everybody understands the work that we're doing, so they know that the work we're doing isn't triggering permits. So we're still working with the school. Gordon has actually helped us recently get in touch with the school principal because we do need to work through. They have an Act 250 permit on the school property, so we'll have to work through Act 250 process for the school trail section. But Mariah has been leading the way on that, and we've been kind of assisting off to the side. So that's been kind of their major lift. And Brooke at Sinuosity has been taking the lead on subcontracting for the parking lot and figuring out the logistics around parking lot design, how that works, especially for the northern lot, which is going to be closer to the elementary school. It's going to be really close in proximity to where the future community wastewater pump station is going to be in the facility there. So they're trying to make sure that they're designing the parking lot in unison with the planning around community wastewater down the line. Those are the major trail updates. Any questions on trails? Okay. I wanted to give a big shout out to Dave Holton, who's here tonight. He helped Rhoda move a shed off of her property recently. I don't know if any of the other folks here in the room, Gordon, I don't know if you were there too, but appreciate anyone here tonight who helped out Rhoda in getting that shed moved off of her property. It's a big win for us all in the meeting and the community to be able to get the project closed. So thanks, Dave, in helping her do that. And then Kate wanted me to, unfortunately, Kate wasn't able to join tonight, but she wanted to throw a pin in the conversations around celebration planning. We have a philanthropy team that has done a lot of celebration planning for successful community forest projects. And we'd like to help with celebration planning in terms of who to invite, guest lists, things like that, around how that all kind of works. So we have a whole team. I didn't know about this in prior meetings, but we have a team that kind of specializes in that. So we should link up maybe after the meeting, whoever's, I think DJ's helping with that too. So we should make a note to connect after the call to talk about that. Those are my major updates, at least what I can remember. Happy to take questions now or later or after the meeting.
Questions, anybody? Sheila or Linda, if you guys are, I can't see you, so feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. Or come off mute for a second and let us know you're actually there.
I'm really here. This is Sheila. Thank you for all the work
Fantastic.
you're doing, Hayden and Dave and everybody.
Great. All right then. Thanks, Hayden. A lot of stuff going on. Amazing to be that you guys can keep track of it all. So let's keep moving. Let's jump into the forest management plan. We got an extra 10 minutes in it by starting early. So what to say to kick this off? I think we might as well just we can jump in. So actually, maybe there is something to say. I think everybody probably saw the note that I sent to Emily after our last meeting, right? So we took down a bunch of items, and Emily saw and responded and talked about including, and also Hayden did a pretty thorough review of the plan, and kind of I think maybe there were a couple of particular details, but I think the gist of Hayden's feedback was emphasizing similar things, and in particular, I would say how I would summarize where we stand right now, open to feedback or other opinions, is our reading of the plan is it's a great generic plan. It's a great kind of starting point, and we need to layer in some of the specific things that we've talked about.
Right.
So I think I'm picturing that the next hour or so is kind of a working session to bring up those issues. Unfortunately, it's probably going to end up with a lot of action items for you.
Right, that's good. That's why I'm
A
here.
lot of editing to do, but that's just in my mind, that's how I'm thinking of it. Does that align with what you're thinking, or is
Yeah,
there anything different
definitely.
you want to?
I figured we would be talking about, going through it. So yes, that works for me.
Cool. Can you, so let me just start with this. Tell us what you did, what activity you've engaged in to get to the point where you were able to draft the plan as it was. And anything else you'd like to tell us about, your process heading to this, and highlights that we should know that we might not have picked up on from just reading it.
Okay. Well, I started by making a map using GIS and overlaid a grid of points on that map. That would be points that I would go to inventory the trees, so. Loaded the map onto my iPad and navigated to each point. And it probably took me at least 10 days. Going out there, and I did have help a couple times. Just because you have to measure all the trees, so you determine which tree that you're gonna measure, and then you have to walk with and measure it, so it, you know, it's a lot faster if another person's with you.
So that's like 80 hours of time spent on the ground, basically?
Maybe a little less than that, but somewhere in that vicinity, I would say. It was lucky that it wasn't the snowiest winter. Sorry for people who are looking for snow, but for me, it was lucky. So yeah, I went to all the points and collected that information on my iPad within, it has an application on it that synthesizes that data that spits out the graphs and things that you saw, information like basal area and trees per acre, that type of thing. And then just, I guess, using my knowledge and experience reading a lot of forest management plans, I knew I wanted to include some background about like the broader landscape in Vermont, and where Wolcott fits into that and the town forest in that context. And I guess I just kind of made recommendations, knowing that the town wasn't really interested in doing much work, or at least not at this point, so I pushed it out, but I kind of like didn't know what to write, so I just, like you said, it was kind of generic, like this is what you could do. So I'm glad we have this opportunity to talk about it more. But yeah, while I was out there, I was just, you know, I would always look around and think about what I would do if it were my land, and what could be done to improve the health of the forest or enhance the wildlife habitat or kind of thing. And I haven't written a lot of management plans in my life, so it's a good experience, and it made me feel like a forester again, so it's good. I spend a lot of time on the computer, so
Right.
it's nice to get out in the woods a lot too.
So your role is more reviewing the plans that consulting foresters made for landowners as
Right.
opposed to actually preparing the plan yourself.
Right, yeah,
Gotcha.
and meeting with people and talking with them, but that's like still different than doing forestry, so it's good.
What would, was there anything that, you know, anything striking about this land, or what would, what's the most significant elements of this forest that you notice as a professional looking at, you know, I mean, we all have, many of us have our own properties and we have our own experience, but this is a big piece, this is a big parcel for us.
Right,
And, you know, I think, I don't know that we have, as individuals, you know, we all have our own level of experience, but from your perspective, I think seeing a lot more forests, you know, doing it for a living,
right.
what jumps out at you when you look at this?
I guess it's definitely a diverse forest. There's different areas that are very distinct from other areas, you know, like up on top of the hill compared to like down by the river on the Bedell piece, or in the white pine stand, or in the spruce fir area where it's just covered in moss on the ground. I guess I thought that was cool. It's really a nice piece of land. Really, I'm sure you all like it too, but I got pretty excited about it just being out there a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do things out there to improve it if the town is interested in doing that kind of thing, as far as active management goes. So that I found to be exciting, I guess. I think there's a lot of history out there. The land has definitely been managed in the past for a long time, so. Which isn't unlike other places we want, but.
Emily,
Something that struck me.
I know some of the committee members in the past have thought about letting some part of the forest become, becoming old growth. And it's going to take decades and decades, but if the group were to decide to do that, is there a particular location in the 700 acres that you would recommend where that be done?
Well, I think definitely on the west side of East Elmore Road, so obviously not where all the trails are gonna
Right.
be. And maybe the area around the cliff and, Whitcomb Brook and just areas that you probably wouldn't do much in anyway. Which are probably frequented by a lot of wildlife, areas that are more secluded on the property or where I would consider doing that kind of thing, I guess.
Any idea how much acreage you think that would encompass or?
I think that's completely up to the community. I think you could. I think you could put in as much acreage as you wanted to create those conditions.
Is there a minimum, would you recommend a minimum acreage for, to set aside for old growth? I mean, we're probably, given the recreation is, one element of our discussion. And obviously the parcels next to the school. But I don't think we'll set the whole thing aside as old growth, but we might, I mean, if I don't want to rule out the possibility. Is there a sort of a minimum size or, other recommendations?
I know that you've talked about this in the past, haven't you? You've had, so I think you've got some recommendations once. I don't know specifically, but I guess if it were me, I would probably want to put aside at least 50 acres, just like off the top of my head, that's what I would say. But I think that it's beneficial no matter what size to create those conditions because they're generally lacking there. I mean, there are some large trees. I think some of the biggest trees are actually like above Route 15, there's some huge white pines behind the school. But that's not really the area
But
you probably
they're
thinking
not
of.
necessarily all that old either,
Right.
relative to some of the others.
Right.
Yeah.
Does there need to be any
And also,
work done to make to help an old growth forest become an old growth forest? Like thinning things, like how would we go about?
yeah, there are recommendations for that. So old growth forests are characterized by trees of all different sizes usually. There are a lot of large old trees, but there's also a lot of young trees, dead wood on the ground, standing dead trees. So doing things that would increase those characteristics like crop tree release is one thing that people do. Which is just cutting trees that are in competition with the tree's crown. It really increases the growth rate. And then if you do any cutting, you could just leave the wood on the forest floor. And you could do this in spurts in different areas to contribute dead wood of different varying stages of decay. You could girdle trees to create snags, or you could just retain trees that look like they're declining to become snags in the future. Yeah, those are a few things that people will recommend, I guess.
So that area around Whitcomb Brook, there's a lot of old hemlocks here, and not very valuable saw logs, or they're
Right.
not anymore, and they grow to be 400 or 500 years old.
Right,
I can see including that area in it.
yeah, I agree.
And the other thing, I'm not sure that there's a lot of us that have been to that cliff. I know probably Jack has. And Gordon and I have. I don't know if there's many other people here that have been to it. I almost think it's going to be valuable for the committee members to just take a tour and find out what we're talking about. Look at the cliff from the top and the bottom. And that way we can think about, how we're going to keep people out of that area. I know it sounds strange, but I think we've got to see what we're talking about before we can make any decisions about it.
Mhm.
I know Jack said there's a road below it, there's a road above it. so-
Yeah, it's sort of, looks like a skidder road that leads to it. And
Yeah.
then perpendicular to that across the base of the cliff is somewhat of a trail, but I don't know how far in either direction it goes, but it's there.
Yeah, it goes off the property.
Yeah,
And
that was my impression. To the
basically,
east, I think it does go off the property,
Um,
right?
yes, to the east.
Yeah.
Right,
just
so
coming this
basically
way.
down the hill.
Yeah,
What's interesting actually is that the adjoining property is really steep. But you know, there's a couple of adjoining properties, but there's one, you know, fairly substantial parcel. That is almost, you know, it's our forest wraps around it. And that parcel is very steep. And you know, I'm curious to eventually hopefully get to know the landowners and find out what their plans are for it. But that whole area, in my mind, having, you know, walked through it a few times, that's you know, that's the place that I would certainly think to recommend for leaving as old growth.
Mhm.
And, you know, something we can come to. Another kind of general question I would have for you is, you know, if you were a doctor, let's maybe see if this analogy works. The forest is, you know, is a person and you're a doctor. Is it a young forest, a middle-aged, you know, young person, middle-aged person, or old person? Is it in good health? Is it, you know, athletic or, you know, is it kind of, do you want to tell it to stop drinking beer so much or, you know, how, does that kind of, can give us a sense of what you think condition it's in?
Yeah, I think it's not quite middle-aged. It's not exactly young. So maybe it's like 40-year-old or something.
Oh, that's young.
And it's generally, yeah, it is young. I mean, in forest time, it is young. And I would say it's generally healthy. As long as we take care of the invasive plants that are out there, that's concerning to me. And otherwise, there's not like alarming level of disease or anything. It's all endemic problems like beach bark disease, which is widespread. That kind of thing. And like some decline just associated with it just happens, storm damage, or maybe it's 1998 ice storm damage to tops of the trees. And but overall, I'd say it's healthy and
a lot of patch out there.
a lot of ash.
Yeah.
There's a good portion of it, I'd say mostly on the Bourne piece of the river, yeah.
How long before emerald ash borer, do you think?
It potentially could already be out there. It's hard, really hard to know. I didn't see signs of it, like the trees still look healthy. But that's like. You can't tell until there's a high amount of larvae in there, so.
What's in this top start with that back with
Yeah, and I guess people say you notice woodpeckers getting at the tree a lot. They're like a really good indicator. But the trees will, yeah, decline in the tops and then sometimes they'll sprout epicormic branches, which are branches on the bole that like are really low compared to the rest of the crown.
Okay.
It's just a stress response that the tree. Yeah, and sometimes they'll have like cracks in the bark or splits. Which probably is farther along with once the tree is really starting to die.
It looks like you called most of the forest even age.
Yeah.
What are some of the treatments you can use to make it more uneven aged?
So just doing some work, I would say, creating some canopy gaps whether that's through like doing single tree selection work, where you would go through and mark individual trees of all sizes and age classes to be removed, focusing on retaining the best trees of all species, or creating canopy gaps that are a little larger, like up to maybe an acre or half an acre in size. And that just encourages like a flush of young growth, where the rest of the forest is, you know, the same age. So you can put in a percentage of groups scattered throughout, and then potentially do some thinning in between groups, or do nothing in between groups.
So like above the Green River, the Nature Conservancy owned a big tract. And they did like maybe 50, what they call habitat cuts.
Mhm.
And they cut a lot of good timber, but they cut a lot of junk too.
Mhm.
And they make, is that part of that is how you make uneven age because a large percentage of it is stuff. It's just growing up from start.
Right. So you wouldn't necessarily do all patch cuts like that or clear cuts. I'm not sure exactly what the treatment was, but you can create openings and leave and have retention in the openings. So leave some big trees in the middle or around the outside edges to help seed in. And so it's not necessarily like clear cutting. But yes, definitely like doing some kind of cutting is kind of what's needed to spur that along. It'll happen naturally over time as trees die and fall over, and you know, I think you can see that if you walk around out there. There's areas where trees have fallen down and there's a bunch of light coming in, and there's a flush of berry bushes or.
So if we spend a lot of years and don't do much, we're gonna have high story, middle story, and very little new growth. Is that what you see?
Yeah, probably. I think it takes a long time. Especially considering like the species mix out there. There's a lot of trees that are long lived, like sugar maple and yellow birch. But so it's a slow process if you were just to let it go on its own.
If we did nothing for the next 10 years, what's sort of a worst case scenario? Is there a worst case scenario if we do nothing? What?
Including not taking care of any invasive plants.
Okay, so obviously that's
Yeah,
something that's sort of a priority.
I would say, yeah. Just because it's not widespread yet.
Mhm.
What
What invasives are you seeing?
Honeysuckle.
Honeysuckle.
Yeah. But then otherwise, like, I guess. An example would be if there were a really strong windstorm or something and it blew over a bunch of trees. There might not be any regeneration ready to grow up
Mhm.
below those, or. Yeah, I guess that's a good example. But the forest doesn't really need us to do anything to it.
Right.
We need the forest.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm just, yeah, that's cute too.
So, you know, looking around to committee members, let me throw this out there as what I think is our objective, our overall objective, and, you know, going from memory, I know we've written some things down, but our overall objective is to have a forest that's as healthy as possible, as resilient as possible for forest's sake, for, you know, going forward for the future. So I heard you say, you know, the forest doesn't need us to do anything. And maybe that's where we stand. I think so. I think you know, what, guys, tell me if you disagree. I think our request for Emily is to give us a plan that is going to have this, you know, have the patient be as healthy as possible as long as possible. That's what we're looking for. It has nothing to do with how much money we can make from selling timber or anything else. And if that means leave it alone and do nothing, that's okay. If it means that actually we do need to get a bunch of skidders in there and haul out a bunch of junk or whatever it is, or, you know, that we're not opposed to doing something if that's the right thing. If the doctor says, look, you gotta get on insulin or, you know, whatever else it is with, you know, we're all for it, right? Is that, you know, are you guys aligned with what I'm saying? Or would you modify it in any way?
Well, the fact that it has to be updated every 10 years anyway, it's sort of like a checkup.
Right.
And then you can sort of make recommendations at that time for the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I would just interject that according to the data that I collected, the conditions out there are not critically overstocked, meaning like the trees aren't growing so densely that they're gonna be negatively affected by that condition at this point. So there is time to wait. A bunch of it has been cut fairly recently, so it's probably good to wait in those areas. But at least based on the data, like from my point of view, there was nothing like glaringly like if we do nothing, it's gonna be bad for the forest. Probably it's not a bad thing to wait.
So I think, you know, we need to decide as a group, what do we want with respect to old growth, right? Minimum sort of 50 acres or more, sounds good. But we should provide some guidance, you know, come up with our view of what we think should be set aside for old growth. Unless you have something, and if you would, you know, have a direction that you think would be best, we're obviously open to expert opinion.
Right, I don't, but I do know, I know that that maybe Kate had some people provide some input about that, maybe it was a long time ago, but it's on the Google Drive.
Yeah, I thought it was that you brought a few pamphlets.
Well, I did, but also, like, I think some other people gave their, I don't have internet, I could pull it right up, but, do you know what I'm talking about?
There's so much stuff on the drive and there's a lot of things that.
Just because some people do have a strong opinion about it, I guess I don't.
If you want to call it the Wolcott Public, it's open.
Would it have to be like 50 acres all in one chunk or?
Yeah, ideally, I would say that's.
Could you have the ability to take a map of the forest and draw a circle where you think we're gonna do old growth, where you think it ought to be? You mentioned, you know, along Whitcomb Brook and
Right, yeah, I think,
like, here's, if you wanted 50 acres, here's where I think it should go. If you want 100 acres, here's
yeah,
something like that.
I think I would want to take another look before like definitively saying.
Yeah, I
Where?
don't, I'm not, yeah.
But yeah, I would be willing to, and I think Dave made a good point about the large old hemlocks, like considering what the species mix is there. I think that stand 3 where the cliff is located is probably
Yeah,
a
yeah.
good one.
Yeah, I like that.
There's areas that, okay, so there's areas that we're specifically gonna call old growth. And which basically management is leave it alone for the most part, right? Not touch it. So that means the other areas that are not old growth technically. Okay, so we're also not timber, we're not managing for timber. So what are we doing for the rest of it, I guess? Is my question. Like,
So I added some comments or I guess some information to each stand prescription, just saying essentially there's opportunities to increase carbon sequestration and storage through doing some management. You could have wildlife habitat by creating some openings.
yeah, okay, yeah,
So there are things you could do.
yeah. Yeah. I guess I just kind of guessed that, but needed to hear it out loud again, yeah, okay. Yeah, at the same time, managing for old growth could involve some active things you're doing, not just leaving it alone also.
Yeah, definitely, because the land use history here has simplified the forest. It, you know, it used to be more complex in species composition probably, and in the ages and different sizes of trees that are out there, so humans have impacted it, so in my opinion, like, it might be good for us to try to set it on a better trajectory towards how it would have been naturally.
Yeah.
But another thing that I guess could be a cool activity for community members would be to identify legacy trees out there, that trees that you're gonna keep forever. And mark them in some way, so that it's clear.
Yeah, some things that come to my mind. You know, our purpose that we agreed through most of the last year is to have the forest accessible to people in the sense, you know, being there as a place for people to go and have an experience is really the main thing. So that of course doesn't conflict with an old growth thing, except, and not, it's not a conflict, but the thing is, what I've come to realize thinking about old growth is it's not an easy place to go for a walk in the woods. It's a place to go for a scramble in the woods, but not a walk in the woods. So we, as you know, stewardship committee, we have to think about balancing different kinds of usage. And think about, you know, recreation and sort of an on-ramp into having a forest experience. You know, the other things that a town forest can bring for us, having it proximate to the rail trail, proximate to our town center. You know, I think it's a really important question, important to keep the balance between, say, recreational uses and thinking of it as a park or a playground in some sense, versus being a completely, you know, being a wilderness space. That you know, where there's places for wilderness, you know, relatively close at hand. So, you know, for us as stewards, I think it's important to keep these things in mind. For myself, having, you know, spent a fair amount of time walking around on the property, there's a few things that are really striking to me. One is that if I'm on the north-facing slopes, you know, facing into the Willow River, it's noisy. The road noise is there. When I get up over the top of the hill and down towards the cliff, it's close in, but it's quiet. It feels remote, but it's not terribly remote. It's actually, you know, kind of accessible to a relatively easy walk. And that to me is kind of a treasure in and of itself. You know, I think that to find places like that that are that have that quality and are accessible is kind of special. So I, you know, want to make sure that we balance the idea of setting it aside as an area for people. You know, do we want to set it aside and close it off, or do we want to have some way of accommodating access? That said, I do think that you know, like the section between the cliff and the Whitcomb Brook is not terribly accessible from any direction. And the thought that's in my mind right now actually is that the adjoining property and the steep like northeast facing hillside that's on the adjoining property, it is, you know, I think would be really challenging to get in there and do management activity. I think we should consider setting aside that ridge line that's across from the cliff and approaching the adjoining landowners and seeing if they wanted to participate with us to make that whole area an old growth, you know, essentially an old growth preserve. So that's my idea at the moment. I'm brainstorming.
Well, I know like 35, 40 years ago, when they last logged on that land that's now owned by Patel. the access was pretty much up with the brook. They pretty much would do things 45 years ago like that. And it probably didn't hurt their conscience at all, because they weren't really knowledgeable about it. Well, today, the access to the land to the north side of Witching Brook, like you're saying, to the top up to Bourne's property is really, there's no access for logging. It's very, very poor access for logging. And if you go south of Whitcomb Brook, the hill is still really steep. Maybe the timber's not so good to the south side of Whitcomb Brook as it is to the north side, but somewhere in that area to the Whitcomb Brook and to the north towards the cliff is really gorgeous.
It is really
And
gorgeous.
it's not very accessible.
Right.
I know they had a way to get up there, but we've walked some of it.
Yeah.
It's whatever, it's not the best.
Right.
Acceptable management practices to make those roads work is there's, they have a lot to do. So, and I think all of that is like, basically, this is all stand 3
Yeah.
that we're talking about.
Yeah, right in that area.
I think some of the prettiest places to walk are on the north facing slope of the Bourne's land. I really, it's not that terribly quiet, but it's really pretty. And the timber just to the north of that pond is just gorgeous. And the terrain is all these little ravines and big ravines and rock faces, and it's just beautiful.
Well, you know, the thing I would propose to the forest committee, this is somewhat related, trail related, but it's a gorgeous hike and, moderately strenuous to start here at the parking lot, get up to the top of the, basically wind your way up to the top of the Bourne property and then go out to the pond. So an out and back hike like that would be probably, a good couple hours for somebody who's going after it. And it's a fantastic trail. I think it can take, could take pressure off of, trail usage on Mount Elmore or, in the Smuggler's Notch area, for instance. Which I think would be a good thing and, in keeping with the purpose of that U.S. Forest Service would have in sending us money for a town forest or, Vermont Housing and Conservation Bureau is kind of part of a regional picture. And that hike would not go through this area around Wickham Brook and what would be specified as old growth. So I just throw that out there as well.
Just to get a sense of geography, the pond you're talking about, is that like in the far eastern, there's like a little arm sticking
Yeah,
out?
on the little
So that's where it is. And then this stand 3 that you're talking about, if let's say you're walking out like to the pond, it's just north of there? Is that where stand 3 is?
Stand 3 is kind of the whole top of the ridge going, running north-south. Emily, probably you can, I'll probably tell lies about it.
Yeah, I think if you went out into the field, the big field on the Bedell piece and went kind of north from there.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
So it's on the eastern,
North.
looks like it's on the
West.
eastern side of the Bourne parcel.
yeah, well, yeah,
And
yeah.
okay, that's all, because I was envisioning it being more running east-west along the river. But this is more north-south along the eastern.
Yeah.
Boundary.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, if on the questionnaire that we did 100 years ago, did we ask about old growth forests to the public? And what was the answer?
It was favorable.
I'm just curious if we had asked that question.
And there's also open, open areas as part of managing a forest that for wildlife as well. I mean, not just an open like brush hog field like we have, but like, a clearing. I think up near the school, there's an old field that's been growing in. It's getting pretty bushy now. As far as that goes, as far as like opening, like making a clearing, is that, if we don't have enough for, say, for health, for certain wildlife, that kind of an area, that seems fairly a bit more intensive management, like if you're essentially clear cutting an area, right? But should we also think about setting aside an area to do that?
Yeah, it's something you could think about doing. I think, the more diversity of habitats you have, the better. And so, and you kind of, the forest is kind of diverse in that way already. But I think having open areas, an area that's mostly forested around it is valuable. We know that like a large number of bird species, even ones that depend on interior forest conditions, also utilize open areas.
Right.
For foraging. They're raising young.
So the average score for portion reserved for legacy old growth forest and wildlife sanctuary was 4.37 out of 5. It was like that was the top three one among the top three results of that category, features category. Yeah, it's really high. So very, very healthy in the green. So very good graph.
Some people.
Is there a certain size clearing? Is there, or is that also kind of arbitrary?
I think birds, if you're thinking of birds only, probably 5 acres is around the minimum. No smaller than 2 acres to benefit wildlife probably. If your goal is to maintain like early successional habitat.
So essentially, by having the whole growth, we don't provide anything for deer or moose or bigger animals like that really devour.
Well, over time, it would, I think it would, as trees die and younger trees grow up. You could, before setting it aside to become old growth, you could do some work to create some younger forest areas, like one technique that people use is crop tree release with canopy gap establishment, where you do crop tree release, then you might find an area where it's a lot of low quality trees, and create an opening where all those low quality trees are. And that would provide a source of food for animals that are frequenting that area.
You just put all the trees and leave them in place, helter skelter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not removing them, so you leave them.
Yeah, I mean, you could remove them, but I think it's beneficial to leave them too.
And then they rot down and then, so it's a little slower maybe, because they have to rot down and then not be covering the floor as much. Or shading as much, or is it?
When you drop them, you mean if they were like hung up or something?
Or if they're all over the, if that, I guess then brambles start to shoot up through them.
Right,
Right.
and there's a lot of species like red spruce is one in particular that will germinate on nurse logs on the ground. So a decaying log, you'll find spruce and fir stems growing out of them a lot.
I'm gonna join our Zoom meeting and, bring up our survey results, just put them up on the big screen in front of us. That, I think it's worthwhile for us to review them and, think about what we might want to tell Emily, for, things we want in our forestry plan based on that review. So hopefully take me only a moment here. Let's see.
While you do that, Gordon, I was just gonna, I think it's in the drive. I'll look and confirm, but beyond just the results, community members actually left some pretty interesting comments in the survey as well that I read over before the meeting and kind of give an extra glimpse into what folks' interests are and add a little bit more context into some of the activities that were kind of high ranking and maybe some that were a little less so. So I recommend after the meeting, if you have any extra time throughout the week, maybe later this week or over the weekend, see if you can find the comments from the survey because they're actually pretty interesting.
Yeah. I think
Informative.
they're in the same drive. I can, could probably even bring that up as well. So let's see. Share this and, except it's not gonna let me, stop share and bring the other tab to the front. Share this one. All right. So these are all of the things that, all of the possibilities, the way this spreadsheet is sorted. This is everything that we ask people's opinions about and converted the average results into a raw score. Converted the results into a raw score. And so this entire list is rank ordered with favorite things at the top and least favorite things on the bottom. And so this is, if it's at the top of the list, that's what people wanted the most of the 120 survey responses we got. And it was a pretty good sample. Obviously there's a lot more people in the world than those 120, but it's still a pretty good sample. So number one, natural resources and habitat. Now, what does natural resource, what do we think people thought we meant when they said natural resources? I take that to mean that, the forest is a living forest and, a place to go and see what it's like to be in nature. Right. And I think that's supported by this item number 2 on our list is marked trails for hiking. Right. It's not multi-use trails, for all kinds of different things, but it's for people to get out in the woods. Hiking and running on rugged footpaths, snowshoeing, ecology, and then this is interesting that ecology tours and education outdoor classroom, like education stuff, ends up being items, in the top 10. And items 4 and 5. And in the top 10, what does that mean? There's 52 items on our list. So, it's not top 10 out of 12, it's the top 10 out of 50, 52. 50 really, because the top 2 rows. So 50, we had 50 questions. Education stuff is 5 and 6 out of 50. Recreation is number 12 out of 50. Recreation as a general principle, just in terms of favorable responses. And another thing about these raw scores is it's rank ordered, but also the highest possible score is a 5.0. Right. And so anything that's got a score of more than 4 has a lot of favorable responses. One way you can tell is this little line in column I. Basically shows, the higher it is on the left, the more favorable the response is. If it's kind of flat, or some of these that have a spike in the middle, the spike in the middle is people didn't care very much. Right, and then, as you get to the bottom, they get spikier or skewed to the right-hand side where things are unfavorable. People had unfavorable opinions. So, we have basically natural resources and habitats, being out in the woods, lessons, skills, education and stuff are showing up again, pretty close to the top. So, I think this is just reiterating what we've said before. We want as healthy of a forest as possible so that we can get out into it and enjoy it. And based on that, it's what I'm reading in the plan is don't do anything. The best way to have that healthy forest is don't do anything or do very little.
Sounds like with the exception of invasives.
Yeah.
So would you recommend, if we're gonna do something, would you say the number one thing to do is invasives? Try to control those?
I
That would be the no.
Yeah, they're big. Some of them are really large plants, like maybe taller than me. And how many berries are those putting out this spring? The birds are gonna eat and disperse, yeah.
I know,
And it's mainly
I know where one of the big ones are, but is it easy to locate the other two? You mentioned 3 big ones.
Yeah, I think I took points on my inventory, so I'd be able to find them pretty easily. Yeah, they're all, at least a few of the big ones that I saw were near the school.
this is the honeysuckle?
Yep.
So that's the main,
Yeah, that's all I saw for invasives.
You just cut it off with a chainsaw, or do you put Roundup on it, or what?
Yeah, you could cut it off with a chainsaw and do nothing, but it's just gonna resprout, so you'd have to cut it multiple years in a row. Or you could try to pull it up, but it's hard to get all the portions, fragments of roots out.
Turn optimal time to
In the fall,
in the fall. Okay.
But shouldn't it be done before the fruit set?
yeah, you could, I mean, so optimal time for treating with an herbicide would be in the fall. Because the plant is gonna take that herbicide and suck it down into its roots.
So cut it down now, and then put the herbicide in.
No, you could cut it down now, and then when you go to apply the herbicide in the fall, you have to freshen that cut.
Yeah.
Is this something that volunteers can do with someone kind of manning the ship, or is it more of the professionals?
You would have to have a certified pesticide applicator, at least there. They can oversee someone doing that. I'm certified, but I'm only certified on government land, which doesn't include town forests. So unfortunately,
That's weird.
yeah.
Maybe Luke is certified.
Luke is certified.
What's the honeysuckle hunting event?
Maybe just really in the lead up of this, not identify what it's then like a green up app or something.
Right. Right.
Is there any Japanese snuff out there?
Out in the woods that I saw.
Good.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's
It's like everywhere.
along the river.
A friend of mine, he had a relatively large honeysuckle right next to his sugar.
Mhm.
And he cut it off in the spring. And it set up a bunch of shoots. And he kept cutting them off.
Yeah.
Because it was readily accessible.
Mhm.
And the next year, it was dead.
Yeah.
But if you're able to, do something like that, I think it's pretty easy.
Yeah, definitely. I think honeysuckle is one of the easier invasives to take care of. To get rid of it dies, but it also doesn't do very well in shady conditions. But yeah, definitely that is a good way. Even, I know some people even just go out and break the stems, just break it all. If it's starting to fruit, break it off so that it can't continue fruiting. That's something you could do immediately. It wouldn't even require any tools.
I know there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 up in those fields. They're pretty small,
Yeah,
but we could pull those up pretty easy.
yeah,
They would come along or something like that. Really. And in a couple of hours, you pull them all out.
right. And then just keep track of where they were because it's not unlikely that there'll be spreads or you miss some, because that happens too.
Cool. So, just in terms of keeping the agenda moving along, I think, right, I would love to, Jack and Kate from, Northern Rivers or Hayden, maybe, thinking if he can be the representative of VHCB, so easement holders. Is there anything more you guys would want us to discuss and make sure it gets included into the, specifically mentioned in the forest management plan?
I don't think so. I think Emily did a great job covering the stuff that we sent to her from the last meeting, inclusion of the earthen dam, inclusion of the ecological protection zone, and some of the kind of terms of the easement that apply to forest management. So those have all now been included in this latest version. I think she did an awesome job really connecting the idea of if there are to be future work or improvements in the stands, how that directly connects to the overall objectives and the interests that are shown on the survey here, how improvements can actually help support habitat and support natural resources and the ecological functionality of the forest. So I don't think that VHCB will have any concerns with the plan as it's drafted. And it conforms to the easement based on my reading of it.
I would agree with Hayden. I did not have a chance to read the latest draft until I got here tonight, and I've been scrolling through it. And as Hayden said, it appears to me that Emily has addressed all of the questions and concerns we had at the last meeting. So I'm happy with it. I think the NRLT board would like to see that.
Cool. So we have the exclusion zone for the acidic cliff is specifically called out.
Yeah, and maintaining the dam, the small pond. That's where things are brought.
Okay.
Was there an inventory recommendation for the logging roads too?
Yeah, I did mention that, I think earlier on in the plan. I think it's like before you get to the stand information, it's all in bold, I believe I wrote.
Yeah, we don't have a timeline for that, though, right?
Yeah, I think I just said as a recommendation, did I? Yeah, I said that I didn't assess all the trails. Which like is something I could do if that's something. That would be a good project for me and others. I mean, I know you started doing that, so.
I know there's some old water bars on the upper Gates Farm Road that really need to be either updated. They really need to be fixed.
Yeah, well, who does that kind of work, I guess? And is that, and where does the funding come from? Is that a grant?
I'm not sure if there's grant funding for forest road repairs like that. I know, well, so I mainly work with private landowners. Who can get funding through NRCS, but as a town forest, you're not eligible for that. So I'm not sure.
Hayden, the stewardship funds that you guys are intending to have earmarked for us, would they cover something like remediation on water bars?
Yep, those the community forest management endowment that you'll receive at closing you could certainly apply that funding towards improving the forest roads yeah, that certainly applies. I was going to mention as well, when thinking about future improvements and reading over Emily's plan, thinking ahead, if the town did decide to do work out there and do some forest stand improvements and some harvesting, I think it'd be a great idea to schedule that around public events and maybe schedule a community hike out there to let folks and community residents know what the plan is and how it does kind of benefit the property in the long run. I think that's a great opportunity to provide kind of an educational component to it, to inform people of how you're thinking kind of holistically about the forest and the health of it, and the wildlife within it, in terms of those type of improvements.
It's a good point. And I know Ethan Tapper, the Chittenden County Forester, in a couple of town forests he worked in, he did some harvesting, and then he put signage up afterwards. So community members could walk around, and he actually had like QR codes on all the signs. People could, if you're that connected, you can use your cell phone to read more about it. Yeah, just another potential thing that could be done with it. But I agree, it's really definitely important to educate more people about it, why we're doing what we're doing. What's important.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? Something about, or,
Yes.
I think we need to define what we want for old growth.
Right.
You would, is the adjoining property that I was mentioning, I imagine it's in current use.
Yeah, I think that's what I was gonna try to pull up. Where I got on the internet. I think I have inspected it. And they're right on the river. They have a bridge, like a footbridge that goes across the river, but otherwise they don't have a good way of crossing it, as far as I could tell. They haven't done any work there in a long time. Maybe they would be interested in putting into that and not doing anything. I'm not sure. Is that what you're kind of?
That's what I'm thinking, right? I mean, I think that, you know, they probably have a forest management plan.
They do, yeah. I
They-
can share that with you. It's public information, so if you like, I can send you their map and plan.
Yeah.
Have their
I would-
contact
I would-
information.
I would very much like,
Okay.
all of that, in fact, and,
Okay.
because, you know, looking around the room, yeah. Do you guys feel like we should contact the landowner and see if they would want to, you know, if we want to collaborate on setting aside some old growth forests?
It sounds like worthy research, you know, if that's an area that, you know, has a kind of like the characteristics that have been discussed in terms of being ideal. The more that we can increase, the stand, it will impact every, you know, all the wildlife in that area. That much more effectively.
That landowner wouldn't necessarily have to comply with the conservation easement or the forest management plan for that matter.
Unless they've altered their current use plan to sync with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, unless they will voluntarily want it, I mean, I'm speculating here, but I would say unless they voluntarily wanted to enter into an easement or some kind of agreement, then, you know, there's nothing we could do to compel them. But if they're already in a, you know, have a forest management plan, you know, I mean, who knows, maybe they're managing with the intention of a big cash crop coming at some point, and, you know, if they are, so be it, but I think it would be good to, you know, that we should talk to them. And who knows, maybe they want to put an easement on their property.
They'd be excited about it. Right.
So, well, if, you know, consensus is we should go forward with that, then I'll coordinate with you and see about reaching out to them.
And as far as improvements go, and not harvesting, that doesn't necessarily have to happen only in either the driest time or when the ground is frozen, right? If you're not skidding, you can do certain improvements, like either just leaving trees or crop release to start. Can that happen at any point?
Yeah, I would say I would avoid the growing season, just because birds are nesting and other animals are breeding. So maybe if you did it outside of like April 1st and August 15th or something like that.
Yeah.
It seems to me if natural resources and habitat, number one. Vermonters tend to think of habitat as deer country. Some of them, a quarter. The rest think of birds, turkeys and whatever. But if we're gonna satisfy that 1 in 5 Vermonter that has a hunting license that wants to go deer hunting, in order to make habitat for deer, we've got to cut something. We really have to cut something somewhere to make browse
There's,
someday.
from that survey, hunting was pretty low on the list for the forest.
Well, how many of those people think of habitat as deer habitat? That's my question.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm way off, but I know a lot of people really are interested in creating deer and turkey habitat, and bird habitat, like. I spent I have habitat for dogs. I have habitat for bluebirds, I have,
A lot of people.
this and that. But I still cut a lot of stuff so that the deer have something young to eat. So I think it's someday along the line, we're gonna have to designate an area and do some cutting. Not necessarily harvesting, but maybe just cut junk, maybe just girdle some trees,
Yeah, I would say, at least in my time spent out there, I saw a ton of deer. Deer are out there, and I found a big shed antler.
The shed.
Yeah.
Wow.
And maybe that's because of the harvest that occurred out there not too long ago. Not sure why there are definitely a lot of deer frequenting the area.
Yeah.
But you're right, over time, that could decline.
I mean, I think in terms of habitat, to my mind, 730 acres is a lot, but it's also not very much within the scope of, how far the deer move. And I'm not sure that our town forest needs to or needs not to be the place where we have deer habitat. I think there's lots of other habitat areas around for them, or browse areas, et cetera. But so I agree with you 100%. I think, we need to keep track of all of the possible uses and opinions, and some people, some people's voices are going to come out more strongly in an online survey, and others are going to come out through different mechanisms. And I don't know that there's any way we're ever going to get all the voices together and get them balanced, but I think we need to think about whether all the voices are well represented or not. So, you raise a good point.
I'm not against managing the forest for good people habitat either.
Mhm.
I think we want to make this forest interesting for people so that they make use of it. Number one.
Yeah. I certainly think so as well. Which, recreation is high on our list. So, I think we've got evidence that supports that. as well. So is there anything else we need to cover then from a, with respect to the forest management plan?
I guess you had said you were interested in potentially doing some work along the open area along the front, and I just kind of made some recommendations for potentially planting around there. I don't know if that's what you had envisioned, but if it's not, then let me know. And I'll change it.
That was, yeah. Yeah. What's, I have it's up on the screen, it's probably.
It's way at the end.
Actually, probably even make this visible. So at the end, okay, so let's.
And this is for providing cover for fish on the river. But
Yeah, I guess Gordon had just mentioned to me that, I didn't phrase it, just that they'd like to, considering forest restoration along the southernmost parts of the brook, which, yeah, could be good for fish, but also, yeah, just stabilizing the banks and.
Good. So this is also something that probably we should, Sorry, I'm thinking of a bunch of different thoughts here. So we have now a 50-page document that gives us a bunch of things that we could do that would, activities that will further our goals according to what you understand. Then as landowners and stewards, I guess we're going to have to take a look at all the things we could do, the things we want to do, consider what, which things are going to cost money, which things are going to cost resource time and require some organization, and decide what we actually want to make happen. So it's, it's 7:30 on this Thursday night. I'm not suggesting we should do that tonight, but keep it in the back of our minds, and the things like the water bars, et cetera. We'll need to kind of have a list of desired activities that we should prioritize. And at some point we have to sit down with that list and figure out which ones we want to pick. So
I'm not sure if it matters as far as like the easement and all goes, but I'm happy to amend the plan in any way in the future if that needs to happen to align with the goals of the community, so.
We're not necessarily locked in for the next 10 years
No,
from this
no.
now.
yeah, and one thing, again, just in terms of keeping the balance, what we're not talking about is utilizing timber from the forest so as to be able to have locally sourced building materials for, say, Habitat for Humanity houses or local firewood or other things. There's things that people do, obviously lumber and firewood primarily, but these are historically, if you look at the town of Wolcott, the history of Wolcott is that there's not a lot of great places to farm, so people made money by harvesting timber and cutting it up into boards, right? We had a number of sawmills in town, and my forest land changed hands and was owned by 4 different lumber companies in the course of 10 years or something. So there was a lot of like that activity was part of our heritage in this town. A good part or a bad part is an interesting question, but we are excluding that kind of activity at this point. And it's worth, let's do that consciously rather than just kind of letting it slip under the rug.
Maybe maybe you don't want to go down this rabbit hole tonight, but the whole carbon sequestration, carbon storage, as far as cutting a forest and having trees grow up versus leaving it alone, is that ever going to be settled, or is it up in the air, or has it been determined which, when it comes to carbon sequestration, which is better?
I think there's time as a factor as well. So when you cut trees, obviously there's a release of carbon. But I think within 5 or 10 years, the amount of carbon that's being sequestered goes up. And then carbon storage over time also goes up. But yeah, I do have some information about that I could send to the committee as well. A couple just like quick, they might be like 2-page PDFs with like some diagrams that are helpful, I think. But yes, if you just leave the forest alone, trees are gonna die, and that's gonna be a release of carbon as well, so.
Right, and then timber, if the wood is getting milled and then built with, that's a store.
Right.
Right, that's gonna store it much longer than if it rots in the ground and gets released.
Right.
So yeah, I think I guess there is debates as to what's the best way to, right, manage forest from just that standpoint alone, but yeah, it sounds like it'd be great if, yeah, we could get that information.
Yeah. I know I have at least one document that would probably be useful.
I'll throw this out there because carbon accounting is kind of funny. And the funny thing that I saw today was a presentation of environmental costs of generative AI. So it turns out that one chat GPT interaction is this is the equivalent of 22 Google searches. When you know your carbon impact is 22x from doing a Google search. But to put it in context, 16 ChatGPT interactions is the same carbon, same carbon dioxide release as the energy consumed to boil a kettle, to bring a tea kettle to a boil. So if you're doing, boil a tea kettle or make 16 ChatGPT interactions on a day. On the other hand, I think the energy it took to train the model for ChatGPT was something like the equivalent of producing 700 BMWs or something like that. So anyway, carbon sequestration and boards versus firewood. So some people take this down to a very, very particular level. All right, on that, so let's come back to Earth and local things. 2 more items on the agenda, an update on the vernal pool outing and thinking about the grand opening event. So let's talk about pools first. And Jack, you held the clipboard while we've been out.
Yeah, I've given all the information to Gillian Kelly. It was a successful trip. We found 6 vernal pools. 5 of them had wood frog eggs and spotted salamander egg masses. And quite a few numbers of egg masses in most of them. The last one we went to, which was the most northern one, I even questioned if it was a vernal pool. It was quite small and already looked like it was starting to dry up, and there were no egg masses. But I don't know enough to say it was or wasn't really. It just didn't appear to be as productive like the other 5 were. Some of them, a couple of them were pretty massive pools. I think it was the 3rd one. There were ducks on it when we arrived. They didn't stay long. They were there for a while. But yeah, I thought it was a great day. Dave had arranged easy access to that area through a friend's property, which really helped quite a bit. We could have spent half the day coming from this side trying to get to them. So that was really helpful. But I think we were able to get latitude and longitude for everyone. We took at least one photo of each pool. I think we estimated the length and width and depth. And those are just, eyeballing. We didn't actually measure anything, but, yeah, it was a great day. Successful.
Well, thank you for spearheading it, Jeff.
I do it all again.
Yeah,
It's fun.
so yeah, thanks. And so I'll just read this email from the guy at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies, because I had asked him once you had all gone out. Okay, now we've got 6 identified. How do we choose one? And his response is there's no particular criteria. A pool with a higher egg mass population is ideal so that changes in the population are more visible. And then I also like sites that are longer and skinny. So I'm really glad that you took the dimensions right there.
I think you'll be able to get all of that.
And the reason is that it reduces the interior area so you can see more eggs or not. And the exact wording is that it reduces the interior area where eggs are too far away to see. So based on that criteria, it looks like the pools 1 and 2 would fall into that category. So, and
Yeah, they were definitely long, long and skinny.
yeah, one was 22 by 75, the other was 20 by 60. So if anything, it would probably be pool number 2, because that also had a couple more egg masses too. So it'll probably end up being number 2, and I'll share this information with them and just see where we go from there.
That's great. I don't remember there was a young lady who could identify those egg masses. I don't remember her name, but it was quite helpful having her there.
Julie, I think.
Yeah.
Sheila and Julie.
I mean, I knew I was looking at egg masses, but whether it was a
Weren't sure
windfall
which
or a
ones
spotted
they were.
salmon, I forget it, because she had a lot of experience.
You have your tinted sunglasses on.
They talked about that.
Yeah, no, it makes a
Polarized.
huge difference. Yeah, it's a polarized glass.
If you want to geek
Yeah.
out, come with us. The first time this dude took us out, and he like fell. He was so excited. He like tripped. Oh my God. He's like, oh my God. Like, I think we're geeks, but this guy like geeked into another level. And then he's like, you gotta put your glasses on. And we're like, what are you talking about? So then he showed us it's a huge
It really
difference.
does.
It is amazing how you can see the difference in the eggs with these glasses that I got on Amazon for $9.99. So.
They were talking about it on CAX television last week. There was a guy there talking about vernal pools.
Really?
And egg masses and this and that, so.
Jim Andrews. Have you
Oh, yeah.
ever looked up the Vermont Herp Atlas?
Yeah.
Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas.
Oh,
He's the one that runs the.
Did you happen to see any of those what do they call them?
Fairy shrimp.
Fairy shrimp?
We talked about, that's usually can be one of the
Yeah.
characteristics of a vernal pool, that and a small bivalve clam.
Yeah, we don't have any in ours.
And I think Luke actually did a little bit of sort of looking for that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
we didn't see any. We didn't spend a lot of time doing that.
Cool.
Shortly after the canal opened, ships were built too big to fit. And shortly after that, with the advent
Hey, Linda,
What?
you're unmuted. Did you have something that you wanted to share?
No, someone was sending me a question.
Yeah, I was hitting Linda up in the chat. So shifting gears for just a moment, or if we're done with the vernal pools. Looking back over the minutes from last meeting, there was one thing that about needing a new document from Tammy for the right of way. That we talked about a month ago. It sounded like it was an open item. So Linda, I was just wondering, anything new with either the FEMA buyout on Tammy Westover's property or with respect to that right of way?
I vaguely recall that, then I went on vacation. I haven't seen any paperwork. I'm not sure if it was sent to Tammy or not, but Tammy has moved um, to Sterling View Park. Nothing new, just waiting for the state to go through all her paperwork for receiving FEMA reimbursement for her home, because if she didn't spend it all on home repairs, they deduct it from the price. That's I'm just waiting for the state. She's all done as far as I'm concerned for now. I have to do a title search on the property.
Okay.
Where, who has the right of way, paper?
So I was going to chime in because we've drafted an updated agreement, but our question was whether or not we think Tammy, if Tammy's property will be owned by the town by August or even July when we close. If which it kind of, my assumption is it probably won't be owned by the town that soon. If it is owned by the town that soon, we probably don't need to amend the right of way because it'll be town-owned land and it won't really matter. If it's still owned by Tammy, we can go through the steps of having her sign an updated right of way amendment. But if it's going to be under town ownership sooner than later, it doesn't seem all that necessary to dedicate time to it.
So I have no idea, like I say, I'm waiting for the state. I could hear tomorrow or not. They typically tell you it's 18 months. She probably applied in the fall. So that,
So it could be another year.
yeah, it could.
Okay.
Maybe the 18 months is the whole time from, once we purchase it, then we have to demolish it.
Hayden, is it, is it gonna be a big ordeal to get that paperwork updated, or is it a simple thing?
It's pretty simple. We just need to, Linda, I can connect with you in getting the paperwork to Tammy, or maybe we can reach out to her so it's at the town office again so she can just swing by and sign. It's going to be the same thing. It just has some more of the information on location of the right of way more ironed out. So this will be more of a final copy from what she originally saw.
Is it necessary before the title, well, you've already done the title search, before the closing?
Not necessarily, but it makes it a little easier to have it be finalized and recorded during closing. If she's already signed it, we can then have Ron Bourne sign it. So it's part of the transaction structure that's being conveyed to the town at closing.
Okay. All right, whatever you think, Beth, just let me know what I need to do.
Okay. Yeah, I'll reach out after the meeting.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing it up, Goran. I forgot about that.
Cool. All right, we've got 15 minutes left in our scheduled meeting, and the one item which is talking about the grand opening event. And DJ is kind of our spearhead for that. I know he had sent, gosh, I think it was even before our last meeting. I think the correspondence we had was all stuff we discussed last time.
Yeah, basically just day,
Yeah.
which weekend.
It's worth talking about a little bit though, because this, we could stir up a lot of activity and interest around this, or we could put some energy into stirring things up. Or we could not put so much energy into stirring things up, and I mean, it's still a wonderful thing. We'd have a party, but I think there's a fair number of people around the state who have connections, whether it's connections with VHCB and other places, or things that TPL has done a couple of months ago, for VHCB funding. Kate Warner asked me to come down and testify for one of the House committees that helps provide the funding. And there were any number of people that had heard about this, legislatures and people on the committee and other people that we met in the State House. So there's there's awareness about this at a number of different levels. And it probably, a lot of support if we want to make more noise, so to speak, and get the word out more. It's something to think about. How big of a party do we want to host? So.
Hayden brought up that they have some people like kind of specialize in this, is that? Yeah, so maybe, are you one of these meetings planning to talk about that more, Hayden?
Yeah, we can. I think I can talk to Kate about it and have her attend maybe the next committee meeting. And we can certainly, it'd be great to get an idea of who's spearheading it for the committee, so we can get them in contact with the folks at TPL that help kind of coordinate these types of things, with external partners like VHCB and the U.S. Forest Service and special private funders and foundations. We can help kind of coordinate how to send out invites and make sure that the people that are interested in this kind of thing are getting the right invite. So yeah, Kate can help connect and with the people on the committee who are organizing it.
Okay. So, I guess what I'm thinking is that essentially the people that have been involved so far, Hayden, have been Gabe, myself, and DJ. And this is not a closed group. Anybody else who wants to jump on board, come join the party. Hayden, maybe the three of us should we'll look for a time where we can get together with you and Kate and strategize.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool. All right. Anybody else, anything else anybody would want to say about that or any other topic? In the sense that we're all talked out by now. All right, if there's no other burning issues, then let's wrap up. I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Hayden. Thanks, folks on the phone.
Thanks all. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, that's. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I had,
I think I put some. Maybe we should.